Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us here today to talk about a very, very important step in making sure that all Michiganders are made whole once they come back home. Before I start, I just wanted to quickly flag for folks. Today is hot. If I don't have to tell you because I'm sure most of you guys feel it, but I just wanted to flag for those in Detroit that we have several cooling centers in the city of Detroit that will be open today and tomorrow as we undergo the almost 100-degree weather. So I just want to quickly flag some of them for you. We have the Butzel Center, which is a recreation site in Detroit, the Crowell Recreation Center, Farwell, Heilman, Kemeny, Lasky, and Patton. So all of those Detroit Public Works Department or cooling centers rather are going to be open today for individuals. Please, please, please drink water. Try to wear loose-fitting clothing and make sure you're safe. Check on your neighbors, particularly our elder neighbors who may be home and may not have air conditioning. It's incredibly important that we look out for one another at this time. So thank you all for coming today regarding this incredibly important conversation about ensuring that our returning citizens, those who have served their time, have an opportunity to get back home and find a way into some sense of normalcy. So a couple years ago, the state of Michigan passed bipartisan historic expungement reform, and we applauded those efforts. But that was simply the first part of that story. I think the next step we have to talk about is how do we ensure that those whose records have been expunged, those who have served their time and paid their debts back to society, can now begin to enter back into the normal aspects of life. And as you saw earlier this year, we introduced legislation that would codify a program to allow returning citizens to get their IDs and driver's license so that when they leave the prison system, they can begin to find jobs and employment and housing. And today we're here to talk about housing in particular. So currently in the state of Michigan, if somebody wants to go get a lease or rent for their home, they might undergo a background check that is quite frankly unnecessary and might deny them that opportunity for housing. So we're introducing legislation today that would address this issue by preventing a landlord or a property owner to look into someone's criminal history or their background if it has no relevancy to their ability to pay rent and to be a good tenant. So this legislation today would prohibit a landlord's ability to inquire about an applicant's criminal history or prior arrest record, and that if they do, it must be disclosed. And to be clear, there are only two scenarios in which this would be something that makes sense. Number one, if that individual has a history of criminal sexual misconduct or criminal sexual abuse or violence, that would be something that is a reasonable thing to inquire upon, especially in a multi-unit facility. And the other one is under federal statute, if this individual is applying for federal housing, that they would look into their background in that situation. So this legislation would give due process in this endeavor to try to find a home by doing a couple things. The one, if you are going to inquire, you must disclose it, but only after you simply look at the facts. Does this person have stable income? Do they have the ability to pay rent? And are they going to be someone that you know from a financial perspective is able to secure the housing? Because that ultimately is the most important thing. So as we talk about our renters, we're asking our tenants to simply say, our landlords, to say that if a tenant comes to you and they fill out an application and the application is sound on the financials and is sound on the stability of that tenant, then that is something that we accept without having to delve into that. And this legislation further creates a process with the Department of Civil Rights that if a tenant or a potential applicant feels that they were done wrong or discriminated against simply because of a suspicion, to be clear, this is simply a suspicion by an individual, then they would be able to go through a due process with the Department of Civil Rights at which a complaint can be filed, and then we would go through a court system to protect that potential tenant and applicant. And finally, this would require transparency in this process, that it would require the Department of Civil Rights to build out a framework, an FAQ, and an application alongside the actual tenant application to be able to figure out and see that these rights are something that someone has and that they are outlined to them, the mechanism that they can go through to ensure that they are protected in this process. And it also requires any property owner or potential landlord to publicly display this information in a place that is considered a common space. If you are renting out an apartment complex, perhaps the main lobby or a laundry room or something that is easily accessible to the public. So we have some incredible people here today, and I'd be remiss if I did not acknowledge their presence. Obviously, my good friend and colleague who represents Lansing and Holt, Representative Kara Hope, is here with us today, and we have incredible organizers who helped lead this initiative, folks from Nation Outside and Safe and Just Michigan. So with that, I'd actually like to invite up somebody who will share a personal story on this issue. Please welcome Ms. Jessica Henry. Jessica?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jessica Henry. I'd like to share my struggles and barriers in obtaining housing after my incarceration. When it came time for me to obtain housing, I filled out several housing applications, and of course there was an area where it said, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" And I told the truth, and upon reading the application, I was denied immediately, and no further phone calls were made to me. So I was the one to make further phone calls and investigations with the facilities, and I was rejected in every single step that I took. So I advocated for myself and was continued to be rejected. I am a student at Spring Arbor University, and I was rejected for that as well. I have a great credit score, which I worked hard to get. I was rejected still. I have a job. I have money to pay my rent. I was still rejected. My criminal history is from 2014, and, excuse me, I still continue to be rejected for housing. I've been out of prison for 2 years, and I continue to be rejected for housing. I feel that having safe housing is something that keeps people in my state, my position in life, healthy, mentally, physically, and from recidivizing. And it's important to provide equal opportunities for people who work hard to gain stability in life. I served my time. Yes. I'm done, living a life like I used to live. I've worked hard to get where I'm at now. I now live on campus, and the only reason I live on campus is because I can't find housing anywhere else. So I'm taking every step I can to advocate for myself, to find fair housing, because I deserve a chance. Yes. I deserve to have fair and equal opportunities anywhere I go in life, especially housing, to have safe communities for me, for you, for our families. So I'm just asking that you support Nation Outside in fair housing. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story, Jessica, and congratulations on continuing your education. That's great. I hope things get easier for you. Perhaps this legislation can help. My name's Kara Hope. I represent the 67th House District, which includes Holt and South Lansing. And I'm going to go off script for a minute just to share a story that's kind of top of mind right now. I've been all around Lansing, canvassing, knocking on doors. It's campaign season. And I was in one neighborhood that was a little neglected, a little run down, and I was talking to an older lady who had lived there for 30 years. And she said, this neighborhood was great until these absentee landlords came in and started buying property for cheap. And in fact, the absentee landlords are so neglectful that they would rather let their houses sit empty than rent them out. I mean, because they can take the business loss, is what she said. So, I mean, I can't imagine that's better for a community or a neighborhood to have empty houses sitting there when there are plenty of folks who could use a home. This legislation offers Michiganders a second chance. It establishes fair housing practices to support those, like Jessica, who are attempting to move their lives forward. We need to make a change. We need to directly help those who are starting over, those who have served their time, and those who merely seek comfort and to fulfill one of their basic needs, which is housing. Past mistakes don't define individuals, and they don't negate the need for housing access. We're all human. That should go without saying, but I think we need to say it. These folks have paid their debt to society, and that shouldn't cast a shadow over them for the rest of their lives. It shouldn't prevent them from meeting their basic needs, like housing. So this Fair Chance Housing Act provides an opportunity to break down socially constructed barriers that are obstacles in the pursuit of housing. I think what we do sometimes, and why it is important to say that, we're all human, is that people who have served time tend to get otherized. Like, you're something else now, you're not part of a society, whereas we know that most people who are in prison are coming back. They're community members, they're, sons, daughters, friends. And these obstacles need to be removed. Yes. So the Fair Chance Housing Act provides one of the steps to break down the barriers to help returning community members get on with their lives and live productive lives like Jessica is. Everybody deserves the chance to integrate back into society once they've paid their debt. If they're out, then the state has determined that they have paid their debt. As Rep. Aiyash said, landlords won't be able to get full individual criminal history when determining if an individual is qualified for housing. As I mentioned with my example from the neighborhoods that I've been canvassing, stable housing is essential for a thriving community. And like I said too, the folks are community members. They're not other. They're coming back to wherever they're from. I grew up in Ionia. I mention this sometimes. I grew up in Ionia, so I'm, aware of prisons, maybe more than most. All the people in those prisons, the thousands of people, are going back to wherever their home is or wherever they want their home to be. Why should we make it harder for them to move on in a productive way? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hope. I'd now like to invite up Mr. Tony Gant, the Policy Director for Nation Outside.
Thank you. Well, good late morning, everyone. I appreciate everybody showing up. I want to say thank you first to Rep. Abraham Aiyash and Rep. Kara Holt, and especially to our community engagement specialist, Jessica, for being so vulnerable and sharing her personal struggles with housing. For Nation Outside, we have been at this fight for a very long time. We understand how important housing is to formerly incarcerated people and to people with criminal records. We know you can't do much in society without being housed. That includes keeping a job. It's hard for people to keep a job if they can't find somewhere to live. We know that people that are formerly incarcerated are 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general population. We understand what that means because everybody in Nation Outside, all our staff have been incarcerated. So we know what it's like to struggle when you're released. I was incarcerated for 20 years, from 1995 to 2015, been out 7 years. I still face the same barriers. I'm still judged by a criminal record that came from 1995, almost 30 years ago. That is the world we live in. So I'm thankful for a day like this when we can start knocking down some of the barriers that people face every day. It makes our community less safe. The more people we lock out, our community is unstable and less safe. If we want a safe community, a vibrant community, then what we'll do is give people second chances. Yes. It is common sense. Yes. The fact that we have taken so long to do this should be an embarrassment to the state of Michigan. And Nation Outside is calling on cities in the state of Michigan to enact local ordinances. Lansing, Flint, Inkster, East Lansing. We've talked to these cities, and it's time for these cities to move forward to give people a chance and create a safer environment for everybody that lives in the state of Michigan and in these cities. Again, I want to thank the representatives for their courage to talk about an issue that is often left in the dark. It's time that we start considering the fact that the more we lock people out, the more unsafe we are. I'm asking everybody to join Nation Outside's movement to unlock housing in Michigan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tony, for your incredible reminder of why this work is so important. Jessica, obviously your story was incredibly moving, and Representative Hope, who is standing with us today to make sure that this is an important issue that we address. And I think the overall highlight is this. As folks are brought out of the prison system and back into society, the goal is to stop recidivism, right? We want to keep them back in society and away from any trouble and away from any issues that could lead them back to prison. And we know that when people's ability to have a roof under their head and a paycheck that is sent to them, if those two things are made extremely difficult, the likelihood that they fall back into the incarceral system is higher. So we need to ensure that if we really believe in second chances and we want to return our citizens back into society, that we address these very simple issues. And Tony mentioned how in the city of Detroit, this is already done. Landlords are not allowed to ask about someone's criminal history as long as it's not relevant, again, regarding the issues around criminal sexual history or if this is regarding federal houses and a federal crime was committed. So we are calling on other communities to do the same thing. Right here in Lansing, there's a local ordinance, but the state can lead by making this an entire law that every community can follow and practice in ensuring our communities are given that opportunity to fill up housing. Rep. Hope mentioned there are empty houses in South Lansing. I guarantee you that there are plenty of returning citizens that have the ability to pay the rent to be able to go back into those buildings and provide a source of income for that landlord and provide housing for themselves. So with that, we want to thank everyone for tuning in and joining. We'll now take questions from the press.
I was going to pull them off the side, but I'll just ask you, I guess, what inspired you to want to kind of start this initiative here?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll let Tony come up in a brief moment, but you know, one of the things that we try to be intentional about is those closest to the pain tend to bring the best policy forward. And this was an issue that these community leaders sort of engaged on this process. As we looked at the conversation around banning the box for work, the conversation around banning the box for housing came up as well. And organizations like Nation Outside and Michigan Liberation and several others came to the table and said, this is something that can be worked on. And although it's happening locally in a piecemeal process, if we did this statewide, it would open up so much opportunity for folks to be able to return back into society and have housing. And this was really just a common sense approach that if somebody served their sentence and was released and now they want to be able to go to school and go to work, stories like Jessica, to be denied simply because of a mistake you made in the past that you already paid your debt for just didn't make any sense. So this is an issue that keeps our community safer. It creates more economic prosperity for local communities, and it allows people to have what we believe is a basic human right, which is housing and a roof over their heads. So I want to thank, I'd be remiss if I didn't say it was the folks behind me and the folks that are organizing in these institutions that led the conversation around this policy. Tony?
I'll put you this side, but I guess
Okay.
just a follow-up question, I guess is kind of what are the next steps, kind of what happens next?
Yeah, so, this is something that I believe will likely be referred to the Judiciary Committee. And this is something that is not polemic. It's not something that is charged on in terms of, does this make sense for society? And if we passed bipartisan expungement reform several years ago here in the Michigan House, certainly this goes into that process, that if someone's record is expunged, being able to be asked that question is quite frankly unnecessary. And this is something that makes sense. I think both Republican and Democrat, the idea of people who are able to pay rent should be denied that right and are forced to stay on the streets or have temporary housing is just unacceptable. So I think this is something that'll make a hell of a lot of sense in the Michigan House, and we do expect that our colleagues would be on board for such a basic initiative. And this is something that affects all ranges of people across the state. It's not simply an urban issue. Like Kara Hope mentioned, Rep. Hope, she lived in Iona. A lot of people were going back to their respective communities. And, 10 million Michiganders, I'm sure there are folks all across the state who would benefit from this legislation.
Absolutely.
Can I speak to that? Or?
Absolutely.
Hi, thanks for having me and allowing me to speak. I'm Bonnie Zabel. I'm the Northern Michigan Regional Coordinator for Nation Outside. We are moving things. We're moving that needle. I am up in Traverse City, and we are sitting down talking to the City Commission. We are trying to get this ordinance passed in Traverse City, and the biggest barrier there is homelessness. Traverse City has a large population of homelessness, and those are the barriers. The barriers that you can't get a house. And when it's homelessness, it's a community issue that needs to come together. And we're coming together in the communities, and luckily we've got people to step up and make it a state issue, because it is a state issue across the communities. We can't have the homelessness, we can't have the revisited, because they just keep it going. So we need to start at the state level, bring it down, and then correct that situation, get us into housing, get us into jobs, that we can continue to be those members of the community and be an active part that keeps building it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Any further questions? All right, thank you all for coming.